Today we'll look about how the Redux data flow works. In terms of the Redux data flow, we have the action creators, store, reducers, and view. So the first step is to get the provider. The provider in the app.js wrap the app with the provider, and the provider is going to get into the app, and it is going to wrap it. So we will be getting the provider, and in that we'll also be getting the store equal to store. We just need to import the provider from the React Redux. Okay, and the counter, for example, this is an app basically to get the counter and increment and decrement, two values, two buttons. Okay, so that's why we'll be getting a counter component over here. Next coming is the store. The store.js, we need to create a file, and we need to define a function called a store. Okay, const store equal to create store. We just need to export it. What will be written it, we'll be looking at in some time. The next is create a file called as counter.js. In that we'll just prepare the layout of the whole component. That is, we'll be creating the function const counter, and we'll be exporting the counter, and in the return function we'll be giving the counter variable, and then we'll be doing the two buttons, increment and decrement. Okay, next comes in the store.js. Again, we have defined the store and exported it, right? Now we will be defining the state. The state is nothing but the variable. Over here we will be just doing the counter variable, and we'll be initializing that to 0, and then we'll be defining a reducer function. The reducer obviously takes state and action. As of now we'll just put state, but after that we'll be doing a state equal to initial state. But right now we'll be doing state comma action equal to, the arrow function, the return. We'll be looking that in some time. This is the reducer. This reducer again will be putting that in the create store. Next is in the store. Again, there are two things. One is action types, and the next is action creators. Now we'll be doing the action types. The action types is nothing but variable. Const increment equal to increment, and const decrement equal to decrement. It's just variables, that's it. Nothing more than that. Next is action creators. Okay, action creators is the one where the whole logic is written. The whole function is written. Over here, as we know, we have two buttons, increment and decrement. So we'll be just defining two functions. For me, I've done as add and reduce, and this takes as type and payload. Over here, type is nothing but the action types what we have done. So type is increment and the type is decrement, right? And the next is we'll be using this action creators in the reducer. So in the reducer, now we'll be taking the state equal to initial state, the before, and now we'll be putting in the return function as switch statements. So switch action dot type, whatever we have given the action type, now we'll be doing that. Action dot type, case of first is increment, the first one was increment, right? In the return function, this is the whole core logic what we'll be doing that in the Redux. So over here what I'm doing is I'm giving the previous state comma counter, the variable of state dot counter plus 1. Similarly, case decrement of return, the three states, it should be three states actually, previous states, comma counter of state dot counter minus 1. The default is return state. That's it. Next, in the counter function, we'll be taking that value. So use selector is, we'll be defining a state and state dot counter, which will be putting that from the store. And dispatch is the use dispatch. If there's any side effects or anything, we'll be putting that in the use dispatch side effects. And the last one is in terms of the counter, So use selector we have already seen, right? So counter, now we'll be using this counter variable, and button on click is now we'll be using dispatch of add function, dispatch of reduce function. That's it. The conclusion is, as you have seen the steps, first is provider, next store, the next is reducer, and we can also put the reducer over here, the state, and then the action types and the action creators. Next is um, action type and action type, and in the switch statement we'll be putting action dot type. In the return, this is where the whole logic is there, and afterwards in the counter section we'll be using the use selector and use dispatch, and last we'll be putting the on click function over there in the dispatch add and reduce. That's it.